You've heard this one before. Guaranteed. 90% of restaurants fail in their first year. Everybody's uncle says it. Every don't quit your day job conversation eventually gets to this exact number. It's been repeated so many times it basically feels like a law of physics at this point. Here's the twist. It's completely made up. There is no study behind it. No government data. No research paper. It traces back to a single American Express commercial from 2003 in AD. Not a study, and somehow that one unsourced sound bite convinced an entire generation that opening a restaurant is basically financial suicide. The real number, according to UC Berkeley researchers, who actually tracked 81,000 restaurants, and confirmed separately by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 17% fail in year one, not 90-17. That means over 80% of new restaurants are still open, serving food, a full year after opening night. So does that mean the restaurant business is actually easy? Absolutely not. And here's the real truth. This video is actually about the one that's far more important than debunking an old television commercial. Surviving and thriving are not the same thing. In 2024, only 42% of U.S. restaurants were actually profitable. That means well over half of the restaurants that are still open, still serving customers, still surviving that scary first year, are quietly losing money or barely breaking even every single month. That's the real story. Not will it fail, but will it actually make money? And today we're going to find out exactly why so many restaurants survive without ever really succeeding, and what separates the ones that do. The scale here is genuinely enormous. The U.S. food service industry is projected to hit $1.29 trillion in 2025. That's trillion, with a T. This isn't a niche hobby business. It's one of the largest employers in the entire country. And it's not one industry, really. It's several completely different businesses that all happen to serve food. A quick service burger chain, a fast casual bowl concept, a white tablecloth fine dining restaurant, and a neighborhood bar are competing for the same customer's dollar, but they run on almost entirely different economics. Which is exactly why restaurant is such a dangerous word to use casually. The version you pick determines almost everything else in this video. There is one number though that connects nearly all of them, and it's brutal in its simplicity. Food costs are now more than 35% above pre-pandemic levels. Whatever margin cushion existed a few years ago has been getting squeezed from the ingredient side for years now, regardless of what kind of restaurant you're running. Let's get real about the entry price, because this is where a lot of dreams quietly die before a single customer walks in. A full traditional restaurant concept, real kitchen, full dining room, full staff typically runs $500,000 to $1.5 million to open. That includes build-out, kitchen equipment, furniture, initial inventory, licensing, and enough cash reserved to survive the slow ramp-up period before regular customers show up. Fast casual and smaller concepts are dramatically cheaper to launch, somewhere around $100,000 to $300,000, because you're cutting out full table service, often shrinking the kitchen footprint, and running a leaner staff. That lower barrier to entry is exactly why fast casual has been eating market share from traditional sit-down dining for years now. There is a metric worth knowing here that most first-time owners have never even heard of: revenue per second eat. The industry average sits around $27 per second eat, though this number swings wildly based on concept, price point, and how many times you can turn that seat over in a single night. A restaurant with 50 seats that only turns each seat once a night is playing an entirely different game than one that turns every seat 3 times. And here's the timeline reality that catches almost everyone off guard. Most restaurants need somewhere between 6 and 18 months, and sometimes up to 3 full years, before the business turns genuinely profitable. If you're financing this with savings and a loan, that runway needs to be part of the plan from day one, not something you figure out after the money's already spent. Here's where most new owners think too small. They picture the dining room, the food coming out of the kitchen, and stop there. But the restaurants actually printing money are running several revenue streams at once. Not just one. Stream 1, core food sales. This is the obvious one, plates going out the door. For most concepts, this remains the majority of revenue, but leaning on this alone, with nothing else layered on top, is exactly the position that keeps a restaurant hovering at break-even, instead of genuinely profitable. Stream 2, beverage and bar program. Here's a number that should get your attention. Bars and beverage. Heavy establishments can post net margins of 10 to 25%, several times higher than a typical full-service restaurant's 3 to 5%. A well-run bar program isn't a nice add-on. In a lot of successful restaurants, it's quietly the most profitable thing happening in the entire building, because pour costs on drinks are dramatically lower than food costs on a plate. Stream 3 delivery and ghost kitchens. 42% of full-service restaurants now operate at least one delivery-only concept, meaning they're running an entirely separate virtual brand out of the same kitchen, during the same hours, with almost no additional overhead. This is one of the smartest moves available to an existing restaurant, because you're monetizing kitchen capacity that would otherwise just sit idle between the lunch and dinner rush. The catch, and it's a real one, is third-party delivery platforms taking a significant commission on every single order, which quietly erodes exactly how profitable that free, extra revenue stream actually is. Stream 4. Catering and private events, weddings, corporate lunches, holiday parties. This segment typically carries better margins than standard walk-in dining because you're negotiating a set price for a guaranteed guest count in advance, which eliminates a huge amount of the food waste and no-show uncertainty that eats into margin on a normal service night. Stream 5. Retail, merchandise, and experience monetization. Bottled sauces, branded merchandise, meal kits. And increasingly, restaurants are selling the experience itself: cooking classes, chef's table dinners, exclusive tastings, often at 15 to 20% higher margins than standard dining, because you're charging for exclusivity and access. Here's the pattern that separates the restaurants clearing 42% profitability from the ones grinding at break-even. The struggling ones are almost always running on Stream 1 alone. The ones thriving are stacking 3, 4, sometimes all 5 of these on the exact same kitchen, the exact same staff, the exact same real estate. Now for where all of that revenue actually goes, because in this industry, the phrase prime cost is basically the entire conversation. Food and beverage cost industry. Average sits around 28 to 35% of revenue. This is the number that's been getting squeezed hardest in recent years, given that 35% inflation figure we mentioned earlier. A menu that was profitable 2 years ago on the exact same recipe can be quietly losing money today, if pricing hasn't kept pace with what ingredients now actually cost. Labor cost. This typically runs 25 to 35% of revenue, with full-service restaurants specifically landing around a median of 36.5%, while the operators, who stay genuinely profitable, tend to hold that number closer to 34%. That 2-point gap sounds small on paper, but across a year of revenue, it's often the entire difference between a restaurant that's comfortable and one that's barely surviving. Prime cost, the number that matters most. Add food cost and labor cost together, and you get what the industry calls prime cost. The healthy target range is 55 to 65% of revenue combined. Go meaningfully above that, and there is simply not enough left over for rent, utilities, insurance, marketing, and an actual owner's profit at the end of the month. Rent and overhead typically 6 to 12% of revenue, though this obviously depends enormously on your location. A high-visibility spot in a busy shopping district commands premium rent, but it also brings the consistent foot traffic that can justify paying it. Everything else: utilities, insurance, licensing, marketing, point-of-sale systems, and increasingly significant, those third-party delivery commissions we mentioned a few minutes ago, quietly stacking on top of every off-premise order that goes out the door. Add it all up and here's the honest industry-wide result. EBITDA margins across the sector typically land between 12 and 30%, with the current industry average sitting around 18 to 22%. But net profit margin, after every single cost including taxes and financing, comes out to a much thinner 3 to 9%, varying heavily by concept. Quick service and fast casual tend to land at the higher end of that range. Full service, fine dining specifically, tends to sit at the lower end, precisely because the labor and ingredient costs of a genuinely elevated dining experience are so much higher. Let's come back to the number from the hook, because this is really the entire point of this video. A restaurant can absolutely survive past that scary first year, pay its rent, make payroll, keep the lights on without ever crossing into genuine profitability. It's entirely possible to be surviving on razor-thin or even negative margins for years, especially if the owner is quietly not paying themselves a real salary, and just calling that sacrifice, reinvesting in the business. The gap between the 83% of restaurants that survive year one, and the 42% that are actually profitable, is almost entirely explained by everything we just walked through. Restaurants that never diversify beyond core food sales, that let food costs creep without adjusting menu prices, that let labor costs drift a few points above what a profitable operator holds, and that lean too hard on third-party delivery platforms, without accounting for what that commission actually costs them. Survival and profitability are answering two completely different questions. One is, are you still open? The other is being open actually worth it? And almost nobody talks about the second one, because still open is so much easier to celebrate on social media than barely breaking even. Location can make or break you before you serve a single plate. Over half of diners choose where to eat based primarily on location, so a hidden gem in a low-visibility spot has to work twice as hard and spend far more on marketing just to get discovered. Labor turnover is a genuine structural drain. The restaurant industry has some of the highest staff turnover of any sector, and every departure means retraining costs, service inconsistency, and a manager pulled off actual management to cover a shift. Food cost volatility never fully goes away. Ingredient prices swing with weather, supply chains, and global commodity markets, and a menu priced correctly in January can be quietly unprofitable by summer if nobody's watching closely. Third-party delivery dependency is a genuine double-edged sword. It brings in incremental orders you wouldn't otherwise get, but the commission structure means growing your delivery volume doesn't always grow your actual profit at the same rate. Sometimes it barely moves it at all. And theft and unrecorded loss quietly drain more than people expect. Industry estimates suggest businesses can lose around 20% of sales to theft, waste, and unrecorded transactions when inventory and staff management aren't tightly controlled. A silent leak that never shows up as a single dramatic event, just a slow bleed across every shift. The pattern here matches what we've seen across this whole series. Nobody builds serious, lasting wealth off one restaurant location. The owners who do well long-term are the ones who nail the operating model at one location first: food cost under control, labor cost disciplined, multiple revenue streams stacked, and only then replicate that exact playbook across a second, third, and 10th location, whether through direct expansion or franchising. Chains and franchise operations consistently show better long-term survival than independents. Not because the food is necessarily better, but because the system's training and financial discipline are standardized and proven before they're copied. So, is owning a restaurant actually worth it? If you're picturing yourself surviving that mythical 90% failure rate through sheer grit and a great menu, you can relax a little. That number was never real. Most restaurants that open are still serving customers a year later. But if you think that surviving is the finish line, this business will quietly humble you for years without ever technically closing your doors. The real finish line is the other number, the 42% who are actually profitable. And getting there means treating this like the multi-revenue stream, tightly managed cost business. It actually is not just a kitchen with a dining room attached to it. Watch your prime cost, like your rent depends on it, because it genuinely does. Build more than one way to make money out of the same building. And measure your success by the number that actually matters, not the one that just means the lights are still on. If this breakdown gave you the real picture behind a myth you've probably heard your whole life, subscribe, because next time, we're taking apart the economics of